And that's the physics behind, for example,
another
the reactions.
question people
The
say
reaction, the actual change of mass.
under the ultimate question about
during
the
the course of the 7 years in which the book was put together.
Presentations, we wanted to open up the floor and just have a community discussion about the issues of economic justice. I think that you don't need a lot of material for this. I think that if you've gone through the last election, you have enough material. I think the core ideas behind that entire election was about economic justice. And as we find ourselves into the holiday season, I'm afraid that we don't want to go off the proverbial cliff, as the physical cliff, as people so well coin. So Cynthia, I'm going to give you your time.
Douglas Baker is a development economist with decades of experience, helping people of developing countries to improve their lives, principally in the area of environment, but also in the rule of law, education, and other sectors. His specialty is monitoring and evaluation, systems for determining and promoting improvement in results and policy reform. He was educated at the University of Connecticut, the University of Lisbon, and Yale University, and was a Fulbright scholar in Brazil. He has worked throughout most of the world and has lived in Europe, South America, and the Middle East. In fact, he and his family, including the children, were living in the Middle East for most of the last decade, which was a particularly interesting time to be in that area of the world. So, Mr. Baker?
As an economist, for an economic perspective on economic justice. And this I will give, but I may add some of my own personal perspective as well, as this can't be helped. I may surprise you a bit, and I hope that you will withhold judgment on some things that I say until you hear me out. Besides the point that economics can be our friend, I do have 4 important points to make tonight. 1, we all do better when we help each other to realize our maximum potential, economic and otherwise. 2, those who benefit the most from society and the economy are those who should contribute the most to help others reap their just rewards. 3, economic rewards are not the only rewards or benefits in life, but the balance should be chosen, not imposed by limits on opportunities. And 4, we have a personal responsibility to each other to work toward and invest in reaching our own potential and supporting others to reach theirs. So, when first asked, I thought about all sorts of aspects of economic justice issues, but the topic here tonight is limited to domestic questions, especially America, and not to our relationship with China or Africa or Brazil or India. A whole range of complicated economic justice issues is present in international relations, only some of which involve the U.S. and the things that we do. And I have good news, and we are not the cause of all of the injustice in the world. This month I was in Colombia. Last month I was in Brazil, where I have been several times this year, and where I've been going to or working or living in for the last 35 years. Since returning from the Middle East, as they mentioned, we were there where we brought up our kids, by the way. I have been mostly going to Mexico these last few years, but have also been in Africa, was in Ghana, and other parts of Latin America and back in the Middle East. One of the best things about working in economic development, actually, is working with some of the brightest and most caring people on the planet from the many countries that I work in. But to an extent, working and living in other societies and economies affords one more perspective on one's own. If only some of the critics with the loudest voices of recent months had actually lived in either a socialist country or a dictatorship, then they would know better. Or maybe not. So, does economic justice in America include unequal schools, municipal services, proximity to bus maintenance depots, sewage treatment plant locations, access to public universities, or private colleges, access to scholarships, to inherited wealth. All of these and many more have aspects of economic justice. But let me take economic justice in just one direction for a while, because I've only got a few minutes. And I'm going to take it in the direction of income inequality and perhaps wealth inequality, which is directly related. Let me explain that one of the most basic divisions in economics is that between describing what is and how things function, on the one hand, and on the other, more of how things should be and what should be done to make things better. We call this positive and normative economics. You can imagine that the line between what is and why and what should be can be pretty blurry and influenced by beliefs. I will step back and forth across it several times in the next few minutes. Also, in terms of theory versus reality, in theory, every time RG3 throws a pass, it is caught and it goes for a touchdown. Clearly, this is not the case, though I note that it's getting closer there. My work around the world tells me that the society and economy, which is largely or principally capitalist and private sector oriented, is the best support for democracy and economic participation. I hope that didn't startle you too much. I believe that it offers the best opportunity and best reward for its citizens to reach their potential. Thought you'd like that, Khalil.
The person that actually I did mention has I think brings a very interesting twist to this. Her name is Tracy Velasquez, right? She is the director of the Justice Policy Institute, and she's been there since 1909. Tracy, you guys know each other? Oh, I'm sorry, not 1909? Oh, you're not that young yet. January 2009. And she's been there for a little bit, but before she went to JPI, she was at VARA, Institute of Justice, where she was there handling adult sentencing and correction issues. She also authored a report called Pursuit of Safety. Prior to moving to the justice field, Tracy led the Montana Mental Health Association. They seem to work well together. And worked on a variety of social justice and public health issues. She comes here with a master's degree, a bachelor's degree from Harvard, and she has a master's in public administration from Montana State University. She lives in our county, in Prince George's County. Welcome, Tracy.
If you care about economic justice, you must care about the criminal justice system in the United States right now. We are right now living in a country where access to justice and the way you're treated by the justice system depends on how much money you have. And it's at every stage of the system. It starts even before the justice system. It starts with schools. We know that kids who go to overcrowded, poor public schools tend to be in schools with police in them. They tend to be pushed out of schools more through suspension and expulsion. And as a result of this, they tend to come in contact with the juvenile justice system more often than other kids do. You can bet that here in the DC area, if there's a fist fight at a private, expensive school, no DC police will be called. This will be taken care of by family in the schools. The kids will learn a lesson, probably have some restorative justice type programs, and return back to their schools to finish their education. And I would say this is how it should always be treated. But for so many poor kids, they end up having school police funnel them into the justice system where they can never catch up again. They end up in a juvenile justice facility, they lose time in education, and they never catch up again. So they are already relegated to a lower economic outcome with their life because they never finish school.
So there's a real opportunity there for us to get in front of some of these issues and not now just allow it to. In other words, instead of taking the drive through town, we take the interstate, and we don't see the people that I've seen for a while in long trucks that are out feeding poor people, feeding the poor, And those people are a result of what Tracy was just talking about. My good friend will come to the podium next, and is someone that has been with, I've known Daoud for as long as I've been in Fort Washington, I think. I met him, interestingly enough, over a publication. He was out seeking knowledge, and I was producing a publication. And I think he was one of my first subscribers to Read One publications. And now he's writing his own book. He'll tell you a little bit about that. One of the things we hope to do with the Scholars Chair is to encourage and support more efforts like that. The book that I was going to share with you, and I will before the evening is out, is a book that Read One Communication produced, which is my company, called The Natural Law of Compassionate Justice, where we got the manuscript of Dr. Robert Dixon Crane, who was one of those people who sit at the table making public policy with the President of the United States, and he's also one of your alma maters from Harvard Law, and he wrote about 250 pages on the very issues that we're talking about. But he approaches the matter from an Islamic perspective. My good friend Daoud will speak for a few minutes, but in the process of doing that, he will introduce our speaker. He is presently the director of the Portfolio Management Division, the National Capital Region General Services Administration. He is, I said, a new author. He has been the former imam and the co-founder of the Islamic Society of Southern Prince George's County, and he is a frequent Scholars Chair contributor. Daoud, come to the floor, please.
I really appreciated the comments I heard earlier, and I think about this often, that we are here in America the inheritors of one of the greatest social movements in human history, the Civil Rights Movement. It created many advantages for many people who were displaced in society, but one of its continuing criticisms, or one of the things that seemed to have been left out in the implementation of the Civil Rights Movement, was the economic program that some should have thought should have been conducted in parallel with that social movement. We often remember and reflect on the great achievements of Dr. Martin Luther King, and we often read and hear about the I Have Dreams speech. What we often forget is that the Dr. Martin Luther King speech, who was unfortunately cut down and assassinated, was a Dr. King who had instituted a Poor People's Campaign, who had realized the shortcomings of that social movement and wanted to try to enter, if you read some of the history about that time, the phase 2 of the Civil Rights Movement. And we see some of the echoes of that sort of out of sync revolution, that social revolution, even now in what some people consider the possibility of a permanent underclass in the Black and other low-income communities. And we see echoes of that, not just in the Black and other low-income communities, but we've seen that now in the Occupy Wall Street movement of this day. So we can see that any implementation of social justice must necessarily include an economic program that's consistent, as I understand it from the revelation of the Quran. It's incumbent upon all people of faith to work with all people to advocate for a comprehensive just system. So with that, I want to get to the keynote speaker, Imam Johari, who in many circles needs no introduction, but for some who don't know him, I'll go through a brief bio, and I'll say brief because we could go through pages pages of a biography here. Imam Johari Abdul-Malik, son of Winslow Seal, born in Brooklyn, New York, is a convert to Islam and has been the director of outreach for the Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center in Northern Virginia since 2002. He is also the former chair of the Coordinating Council of Muslim Organizations, the former head of the National Association of Muslim Chaplains in Higher Education, president of the Muslim Society of Washington Incorporated, and a founding member of the Muslim Advocacy Commission of Washington, D.C. In addition, he serves as the chair of government relations of the Muslim Alliance of North America. While attending Howard University in Washington, D.C., where he began in 1974 and received a B.S. in chemistry and an M.S. in genetics and human genetics. So I'm sure we could go on, but we don't want to embarrass the Imam any more than we have to. But with further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome to the podium Imam Johari Abdul-Malik.
And hopefully in this context, the notion that it's not possible for us to have peace without having justice. and it's not possible to segment or to remove the elements of economic justice from the comprehensive discourse around establishing peace or justice. Tonight, I hope in the few minutes that we have just to feed upon what the other speakers have presented, but perhaps to challenge our thinking, given the narrative from the Quran as another way for us to look at what the Almighty has given as a foundation for thinking. The Quran teaches us that the concept of adl, as you were describing, Imam, al-adl, justice, is fundamental to one's faith. It is one of the characteristics of Allah Himself. And the Quran describes in the 55th chapter, beginning with the 7th verse. This surah or chapter is called Rahman, the merciful, saying that justice in weights should be applied to people and counted in a scale, in a balance. For God has raised high in the firmament, and He has set balance and justice. And so do not exceed the limits that God has given you, nor transgress His limits. This is a general principle for individuals, that there is a natural order, borrowing from my friend Dr. Robert Crane. There is a natural order that if you don't know anything about the Quran or the Bible or the Torah or whatever, that if you are to reflect in society, you will see the handprint that says human beings should establish justice. Now, I want to give you, perhaps, because we're talking in generalities, perhaps to apply some specifics that relate to our condition. And that is that the concept of justice, there is a science among one of the Islamic sciences called fiqh mu'amalat, the laws of transactions, so that one can look back and say, oh, how do we organize our society? And the laws of transactions are drawn from the Quran and the prophetic traditions. The Prophet Muhammad says, if you have a worker, you should pay the worker before what? Before the sweat dries from his brow. Now, in our way of thinking, it means people should be given a due and timely compensation for their labor. And that will give rise then for scholars, judges to apply in our own time, place, and context how we should apply that rule of transactions. But there is probably another concept, and that is when one looks at a prophetic tradition, something 1400 years ago, to know that there is what Khalil Abu Fadl, one of contemporary scholars, calls the arc of the Quranic narrative, which is not fair to look back at something and say, well, 14 centuries ago they had slavery. What does the Quranic narrative say? Because it has allowed slavery. Well, we have what some might call today wage slaves. They usually work for Walmart. I said that on TV, right? They usually work at Walmart. They're 21st century wage slaves because their compensation is really not enough for a free person to live on. But the arc of the Quranic narrative would address that behavior in the past, but must be applied in our own context, so that we know from our previous speaker, slavery and involuntary servitude has been abolished with the exception of one thing. What is it? Punishment of crimes. And so there's still a form of slavery in America, and individuals who are ex-felons in many states or places like the Washington, D.C., which are not a state, where you lose your full citizenship even after you have paid back your so-called debt to society. And so within that, recognizing that individuals in the society have been placed in an unfair advantage to receive adequate representation or compensation. Allah has described in another sense, talking about maybe the economic crisis that affected many of us with the housing bubble, these mortgages that were given to people knowing that they would default. The Quran, and I love this, says, "O you who believe." This is now a call to something about the human nature. In other words, if you have any consciousness at all, fear God and forego whatever remains of usury if you are believers. But if you will not, know that there is a declaration of war against you from God and his messenger. And the word zakah, language, by the way, has power. I'm not using these words like for effect or something like that. That the word zakah in Arabic is related to a concept of tazkiyah, of purification. If I am the architect of a society and I want to make sure that there is a maintenance, a social welfare net, I don't give and dispense wealth to everyone the same way. Some people are absent-minded. They'll lose the investment you give them. So you entrust wealth to people who know how to manage money. And you tell them, I want you to hold the money of the minor until they are mature. In the Islamic paradigm, if a person has excess wealth, then they are obligated to pay tax on that wealth. And the tax belongs to the needy. It's not your money. You are a trustee of the money, and if you want to purify your wealth for the benefit of this life and the hereafter, then you have to remove the portion that belongs to the poor person. This gives the poor person dignity because they're not begging you for your money, they're asking for their share of the wealth which was distributed for the whole society. It's a different paradigm. The wealthy person gives it because they want to purify what they have so they can be blessed to have more and to do it again. The poor person in this system says, I look forward to the day when I have enough money that I can purify my wealth by giving to others. And so in this system, it creates a kind of balance. Now, by the way, in this paradigm of an Islamic economic justice model, it means that rich people pay more. Not rich people pay more on a flat tax. There are some exemptions, but they are expected to pay more. I had one of my friends, Congressman Keith Ellison. He said, I have in my wallet here more money than ExxonMobil paid in taxes last year. Some people said, man, he must have a lot of money in his wallet. He said, I don't have anything in my pocket because that's what they paid in taxes. There's something wrong with that kind of system. It is, in fact, perhaps from this paradigm, it is unjust that rich people should pay less and poor people should pay more. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in a story, I won't go through the whole story, but there is a wealthy woman in the society and some people have caught her stealing, Martha Stewart. She can afford, but she doesn't want to pay the little bit that it cost her, so she stole. And rather than pay what she's due, by way of punishment, she sends a surrogate who's a friend of the prophet to plead her case down. The Prophet Muhammad's response to her was a simple one. This is something that I won't do because it has destroyed nations in the past. This kind of economic corruption has destroyed previous nations. Now, maybe 1,400 years ago when he said that, people would have said, man, what are you talking about? Now we see what happened on Wall Street, and we say to ourselves, wow, this could have destroyed our nation. And when America catches a cold, the rest of the world is getting pneumonia. And so it is important that we establish just weights in the balance. Concept of economic justice in the Islamic paradigm is dynamic. And so as circumstances change, I love President Obama. The circumstance we live in now, different than it was 14 centuries ago, but when the prophetic narrative laid down the equality of the work of men and women before President Obama had the executive order for the Ledbetter Act so that women and men would be paid the same thing. The Quran describes over and over for believing men and believing women, for sacrificing men and sacrificing women, for fasting men and for fasting women, a social equality, because it is necessary in order for you to have economic justice that men and women be paid the same thing. The importance, alhamdulillah, of this work. The reminder from the Quran about fraud, saying, give just measure, cause no loss to those who engage in transactions, and know that those who engage in fraud, that the weights and the scale are true and upright, and withhold not things justly due to people, nor do evil in the land or work mischief. God is ever a watcher over what you do. We have a great challenge. And that challenge, and unfortunately I think too many of our younger Occupy movement leaders didn't have a sense of the social movement in this country. And so the movement had some elements that were a little naive. And unfortunately, some months later now, we find some of the leaders of the Occupy movement have been offered jobs. I know some who were offered money from large corporations. You know, they had that show, Welcome Back, right? They said, welcome back, come on back. We'll put you back up on the 23rd floor. You guys get your jobs back. The economy's coming back. And all of a sudden, the Occupy camps started getting smaller and smaller because they had lost sight of the tradition of fighting for social justice. Dr. King could have been bought out many times. They came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they said, you know, you're saying that the work of the slave, that even though he's a slave, he's equal to his master, that's going to upset the economic system that we have. Why don't you do this? We'll offer you to be one of our rulers. We'll even offer you, your religion can be the religion of Mecca this year, and then next year we'll switch to another religion, and then we'll cycle back around to you. Okay? So you can have your religion, or we make you the leader over everybody, and all of us, we do our own thing, whatever you want to do. He said, if they put the sun in my right hand or the moon in my left, I will not renounce this faith until these principles reach every heart and every home, or I die in the process.
Amazing.